This is John Reed of Diginomica. I'm joined again by Esteban Kolsky at CCE 2025. Esteban, what a year it has been, dude, since we last sat down to do this.
It's been so much fun over the last year, hasn't it?
It has been quite a year. And last year, you and I discussed customer intelligence and what we're missing inside your evil plans. And we also talked about Constellation's event and the impact of active inference on our critique of LLMs. Esteban, you know what's funny? It feels like your life has changed more than AI has changed.
Well, considering that AI is 60 years old and has another couple hundred years to go, probably about the same timeline, yeah.
Interesting that you didn't disagree with that point, though.
I don't disagree at all. I mean, it's been an amazing year so far, and it's been an amazing 3 years, but it's been an incredible year this year, yeah.
So look, since that time, you did join Constellation, where you have a very intriguing job title, Chief Distiller.
The Chief Distiller, that's right.
Yeah, what is that?
You and I talk about this many times, curation of information and finding the right information, separating noise from signal, separating signal from valuable signal, creating insights from valuable signal. It's a 5-6 step process. And the thing is, like, everything that I've seen done, it's been stopping at the curation level, and we don't have much more beyond that. And one of the things that happened over this last year is like you, I spend enough time in this industry that all the people that I started working with and that I know and that are friends, they're getting to very high locations, very high places, executives, board members. And the constant complaint is like nobody has the right information that they need to get to make the decisions that they need to make. There's hammered with like 60-page decks from the management consulting firms and like 45-page white papers from vendors and research houses, and they don't know what to do with that. So then I'm an aficionado, bourbon rye aficionado. I love the concept of distilling, taking something that is very low value, low quality, and finding the way to make it incredible. So what I did is found a methodology and a framework in which I can actually do that. Take the information that comes out of all these people, the management consulting firms, the research houses, white papers, everything that's published out there, articles and everything, and find the nuggets of information that are necessary, correlated, cross-tab them, and come up with the necessary talking points and questions in a conversation framework that then I offer to board members and executives to have better conversations.
Cool. I want to dig into that a lot more. Before we do that, I want to talk about your perceptions of this event this year. It seems like the coolest thing about this event for me, aside from seeing the people that I know and like yourself, is just kind of taking the pulse of the room. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you hear almost as much from the questions that you get to the speakers as the speakers themselves. But what did you kind of take away from what you've heard so far this week?
So one of the things that we've done in this event over the last couple of years that has been brilliant is we changed it from people talking on stage and people listening to the audience to creating conversations, which creates more questions and better interactions. And like you said, this is the gold. This is where you get those valuable, very small nuggets of information that you need by listening to people ask questions, not about the topic, but lingering the topic, ancillary to the topic. And that's the value. So this event has been great because we're at the cusp of, ending subsidized AI, finding the end to the LLM value, finding new paths towards AI. And the questions are basically, okay, let's say that happens, then how do we get there, right?
Yeah.
And those are the questions that we want answers to. I don't care if you tell me that Gemini 2.5 or like Llama 3.7 or ChatGPT 6 can, talk to me like if I was its girlfriend. I don't care about that. I care about like how do we get to the answers? And these are the questions and the conversations that we're having.
Yeah, and I want to get back to the diminishing returns on scale of the larger models in a second, but one of the things that I saw throughout the fall, because I've been to a bunch of enterprise events, is there was a big gap between the vendor's view of agentic AI and where customers are at personally.
Right.
And the interesting thing about that is it feels like vendors are often selling a little too hard.
Yeah.
Like, because customers are interested in this shit. Like, they want to evaluate these technologies, but on their own terms, in their own way.
Right.
Like, it's not a hard sell, right? They're going to look at it. They're going to figure out if it works or not. This was really revealed to me last spring when I had a customer at an analyst event tell a vendor, please stop talking about making everything autonomous and start talking about how you can help my people do their jobs better.
Yep.
I thought that was fascinating.
Yep.
And then so many vendors this fall have been using this digital worker phraseology, which I happen to despise. And so during Holger Mueller's panel today on the next generation, the last generation of employers to manage just humans, I asked the panel of customers, do you like this term? Do you use it internally? And they utterly dismissed it.
Absolutely.
They utterly dismissed it. And
there's no such a thing.
Right. So that's really interesting, like just the gap. And then I think there's a gap here too, but I think it's a better type of gap. But let me explain and you tell me what you think.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what people get from these discussions, which are very rapid fire, like a lot of the panels are pretty short. I think what they do is they get a sense of the vision and where things are headed. And they also hear a lot about risks and roadblocks and challenges. But in an elevator on the way up to my room last night, I heard attendees say, man, I learned so much, but I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to do it.
Right.
And my impression is that's okay because that's a hard problem. It's an individual problem. You can't solve that. That's a consulting session, maybe. That's like a longer discussion. But I think what's really interesting is they're going home with a better sense of what's possible, but also what the stumbling blocks are and the risks. Yeah. That's my perception.
I completely agree. So let me put some data points into this, right?
Yeah.
Which, Gen AI went from 30% adoption to 90% adoption in less than 6 months, which is mind-blowingly fast. I mean, we're talking literally 9 out of 10 companies using Gen AI, whether it's directly or through shadow AI, if you want to call it that way, right? Agentic AI went from let's say 2% if you're going to be generous because none of this stuff is new, to 15% in the same timeline, okay? Now, here's the part where it gets more interesting. From the 90% of adoption of Gen AI, it went down to less than 20% success rates. Forget the Nandon study, that was biased, right? Less than 20% success on Gen AI projects in the same timeline. So we went from 30% to 90% adoption, and we went from 10% to 20%, results. So we didn't grow equally. So then what happened is companies started dropping Gen AI as a potential because they found that there's no value to it. GPT-5 came out, Gemini 3.5 came out. All these things are more expensive and less successful. At the same time, agentic AI went from being a dream to being what everybody talked about. Like you said, in the spring and even in the fall, vendors push this stuff so hard. And then customers are saying, I don't care about that. The success rate of agentic AI is less than 1% of the projects that got deployed, despite what vendors would say. So when you're looking at the equal value here, and there is really limited value to agentic AI when you really think about what you're actually doing, which is basically, you get a process and you set it loose to run on itself for the most part with supervision and guardrails. And if it works, you automated a process. We could do that 20 years ago. We don't need all this shit. We don't need to pay 10 times as much in consumption-based pricing that nobody knows how much it is, et cetera, et cetera. I see so much pushback against agentic AI and a little more pushback about, Gen AI. But what is really interesting is exactly what he said. People are taking all this information, all the data, all the distilled, all the curated information, and they're going back to their cubicles or to their offices and they're going what can I really use this for? How can I make my people's jobs better? Not how can I replace my people, but how can I make my people's jobs better? And that's the part that is really, really interesting to me, is when we get to the point where AI is actually a reality-based approach to solving problems in the workplace.
So let me give you 2 points around that. One is I was meeting with Steve Lucas, the CEO of Boomi, and
a smart guy, by the way.
He is, and he loves sparring around stuff, which I really like. Like he's open to hearing my critiques of some of their, what I feel is sometimes the overemphasis of the agentic stuff they're working on versus some of the data plumbing problems that they solve, which I think are really important. And I was going through some customer examples we had written about with Boomi on Diginomica with him. And I said to him, one of the things that jumps out to me is that your customers, they're not necessarily trying to just be agentic. What they're trying to do is they're trying to build a modern data platform that doesn't have a bunch of silos and a bunch of holes in it.
Absolutely.
And once they build that, now they're looking at what they can do with it. And sometimes that might be predictive modeling. Sometimes that might be some kind of analytics support for decision makers. Sometimes it might be automating something via some kind of agentic process. But what they want to do is have all those choices. They're not just saying, oh, I want to go this one direction, which I think is really interesting because I think vendors are really overemphasizing this sort of autonomous future as opposed to saying, look, there's a lot of value in getting people the right information at the right time and then figure out from there what you want to do with that.
Yeah.
And what I think is personally exciting about it is not the autonomous stuff. It's this notion that AI forces this model of iterating all the time, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, no waterfall 1 year later, let's wait. Let's work on this all the time and let's see how this affects my job and my data and my role. And if I can improve upon that, there should be a way I can do that. You know what I mean? And it's like an ongoing discussion.
So these are the things that excite me from this fall conference season, right? First of all, Boomi. I'm amazed. First of all, you could see this coming for the last 5 years. When Boomi went from like, we're going to spin off from Dell, we don't know what to do, we're aimless, to like, Steve coming on board and setting the direction. So like, we're going to be the plumbing for the enterprise. And moving in that direction, not at the API level like MuleSoft and Salesforce had done, but at the true like data flow, integrating databases and systems and all that stuff and connecting all that stuff together, which is really good. That's been very impressive, and the continuation of Boomi for the next few years is going to be very impressive in my opinion. Number two, honestly, I'm much more in favor of Salesforce claiming power and credit for Data Cloud than I am for them claiming credit for the agentic enterprise. The Data Cloud has solved decades of problems for Salesforce that couldn't do what he just said. I want to have all the information available, easily accessible, so anybody can access it. The agentic enterprise is one way to like, use that, but I'm much more valuable. The Data Cloud is much more valuable than anything else. I'm very impressed by IBM and their work with their companies, their clients, in actually aggregating all these components that they built over the years and creating, system, private networks and private platforms that are like, the way that people are going to go do business in the next few years. I'm not impressed by anything else. I think that everything else has just been like marketing and like some interesting things here and there. But like, those are the things, to me, but infrastructure gets me happy. Software makes me sad.
Interesting. Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, and I don't think we got to the heart of all of this at CCE, but it's something that's come up a lot this fall, is where I am seeing the benefits around generative AI and agentic AI. And getting back to, you referred, by the way, listeners might have missed this part. You're referring to the MIT NANA study that got a lot of press.
Yes, the 95% of
it was 95% of pilot projects don't move past the pilot phase.
Which is totally the way it's supposed to be.
Right. Having said that, what a lot of people missed about that is the NANA group is actually pro AI. It's an agentic group inside of MIT building
OpenAI.
Yeah, building agentic sort of orchestration stuff. And so it's kind of funny that their study ended up like appearing to be a takedown when in fact what they were trying to do was to say there's a different, better approach.
Right.
And what I'm
when I say pro OpenAI, I mean pro open source AI.
Yes, open source. Yeah. Yes. So what I'm seeing this fall that actually is more promising is it's not neurosymbolic, but it's more of constrained LLMs in a compound system. So in other words, instead of saying agents make everything legacy, it's more about how do we combine these different components? And so, for example, it's LLMs working alongside more rules-based automation frameworks that still work. Instead of saying that's a legacy, RPA's legacy, it's all about attaching the different things and using all the tools. And when you talk about context engineering with LLMs, what it is about is saying, I'm going to be able to put some data in here that's deeply relevant to my situation. And I am seeing some good project results from this approach, but here's the thing. They're very modest. They're not like about 100x valuation type stuff and like 5x productivity gains and stuff like that. It's things like I did with my video with Eversort, where it's about contract intelligence, where they're able to scan 1,000 contracts and surface information that you would not have caught with traditional forms of AP automation. Yeah. But it's not massive gains, right? Maybe it's 20%. Like, but to enterprise people who care about use cases, it's actually pretty sexy.
Exactly.
But it doesn't get the headlines because it's not moving the markets, right? Because the markets need to feel like this is revolutionary. But what's really interesting is this quiet push towards let's understand the pros and cons of these tools and then stitch them together so that they complement each other. And with the human in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. By the way, don't ever say context engineering in my presence.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's one of my pet peeves.
Yeah.
There's no such a concept, and it's just people that are actually trying to replace.
Well, it's basically giving the machine what it needs to understand your situation.
But here's what he just said. Becomes very valuable. If you really want to do context engineering, the value for context is in the metadata.
Right.
And we don't have ways to access or use the metadata. So if you really want to
talk about context engineering, we're making some progress on metadata.
But that's what he said. If we connect all these things together, we have more access, more metadata, and we can do something. So if you really want to, you want to save the world, don't save the cheerleader, have access to metadata. And then that will give you the context. And people still, for the most part, do not understand that. And when they say context engineering, like it's some magical, one that it comes over and like unicorns poop rainbow, or whatever.
Right.
And that's context is a much more complex concept than anything else we've done. So context is the answer, but context is not the question,
Yes. So, I was using it as shorthand.
Yeah, I know. I understand that. But a lot of people do. And I want to talk about context. I really do, because that's what's going to take us to the next level. That's going to get us past LLMs that are contextless, right?
Well, and it gets me to my pet peeve, which is the word grounding, which I do not use.
Exactly.
Because a lot of people say that context grounds the system, whereas I say it does not, because the system, and we've seen this in studies, the LLM agent can choose to disregard the context in favor of its own training.
Because LLMs don't have context.
Right. I mean, that's not actually grounding, right? So what grounding would look like would be a logic-based world model underneath the LLM that instructed the LLM around some basic facts of the universe that it does not currently understand. That would be grounding that doesn't exist right now.
Yeah.
So when people say grounding to refer to context, I really object, because context, it's not a Band-Aid, but it's a maneuver to get information to the LLM that the LLM's not been trained on, because LLMs do really poorly on stuff it hasn't been trained on, and that's the whole thing. And so what's interesting is the people who are humble enough and modest enough to try to solve industry problems with context. That's what's interesting about LLMs. Now, we could also talk about stuff that's not LLM specific, because we're continuing to have conversations around things like active inference, which is not based on deep learning at all. But
also models, small language models.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of models. One of the things that I'm writing the most about these days is the concept of optimizing AI, which is how do we leave Gen AI and LLMs behind and find models that fit the purpose that we're seeking. Right. I mean, one of the Johnson & Johnson was the first one. They ditched about 1,300 pilot programs in favor of only three use cases that they found value from LLMs, right? And the rest went into a pile where they say, what are the models that work for this? Walmart built the AI Foundry that has about 15 different models, of which LLM is only one of them, that they use for different things, right? You see someone like Zoho building their own language model, building their own browser to actually deliver a different value proposition. This is the answer to AI. The answer to AI is not going to come from the public models and the LLMs of the world, that they have no context, no understanding of language, no memory, and no reasoning. We're just actually asking somebody to search through information and regurgitate it in innovative ways. And that's no value on that. There's very little value on that. So if we're really going to do this, let's go back to the brass tacks, and let's say, how do we really get this going? And we get it going through differentiating between content, context, and intent.
Yeah.
We get it by creating taxonomies, ontologies, and linguistic models. And we get it, and the last part is we get it by focusing on the metadata to augment and amplify all these different components.
But if you take Zoho as an example, they're not abandoning LLMs by any means.
No. They can. Nobody will let them.
Right. Which is why I think it's important. And when I talk to enterprise decision makers, is to have a bit of a parallel track when it comes to AI. One of the tracks is understand things like active inference and other non-LLM forms of AI that are under development now, so you can understand where they're headed, and also it gives you a good critique of the current systems you're using and why they're insufficient. So that's number one. But number two is what Zoho is doing, which is basically what I'm talking about, which is constrained architectures where LLMs are often subservient to other systems. So for example, like I talked the other day to a customer and a vendor. What they were doing is they were limiting LLMs around receivable activity to amounts under $1,000, for example, and they weren't even allowed to touch the other stuff. And then you look at the stuff under $1,000 and you design it so that humans are reviewing it at the appropriate steps and all of that. But what Zoho's doing is training LLMs, building their own, and also diffusing stuff into smaller models that are much more energy efficient and all of that.
Are they grounding the model?
They are not grounding the model.
I'm kidding.
But they are diffusing models into smaller models that are more energy efficient and stuff like that. Yeah. And so the point is, they're taking a very thoughtful pros and cons approach to the technology instead of saying this is revolutionizing everything. And
you said it the right way, right? Yeah. LLMs can only solve the problems they've been trained to do.
Yeah.
90% of the problems in an enterprise have content and needs that are outside of the LLM.
Yeah, exactly.
So the LLM will fail in 90% of the processes.
Right. Okay.
It's so simple.
I want to talk to you about decision intelligence. Before we do that, any final thoughts on your takeaways from what you've heard the last couple of days? I know you were on stage. You also get in some arguments. What's the takeaway for customers?
They're conversations. They're not arguments. This is the thing. I mean, to me, conversation is the value. Everything else is just irrelevant, right? The conversation is the value. I think that the biggest takeaway so far, in the last 2 days, yesterday and today, is that the discussions around AI are becoming more intelligent, and I'm not saying that facetiously, like, oh, intelligence is more intelligent. It's like, we're asking better questions and we're depending less and less in what is being given to us, and we've been told that that's the answer. And that's what actually encourages me, to push forward and say, okay, if I can find the right way to have these conversations, and, as a segue into decision intelligence, if I can find the right content to distribute and the right community to build around that content to to have these conversations about decision intelligence for executives, boards, and organizations, then I'm going to feel like I accomplished what I set out to accomplish.
Appreciate it.